No one in the village remembered when the silence began. They only remembered that it was always there, thick and heavy, like a warning pressed into the air itself. The village sat at the edge of a dead forest, a place where the trees leaned inward as if listening, their branches twisted into shapes that looked too intentional to be natural. Birds avoided it, animals never crossed its border, and at night, even the wind refused to pass through. Elias arrived just before sunset. He had not planned to stop here. The road simply ended. His GPS failed miles ago, the screen blinking once before going black, as if whatever ruled this place had decided he didn't need guidance anymore. The village appeared suddenly through the fog. Stone houses, narrow paths, windows dark despite the hour, no smoke, no voices, only waiting. As Elias stepped out of his car, the silence pressed harder, his ears ringing faintly, not from sound, but from its absence. The air smelled old, dust mixed with wet soil and something metallic beneath it. He noticed markings carved into the stones lining the road, symbols he didn't recognize, scratched deeply as if done in desperation rather than design. A figure stood at the far end of the path, an old man, too still, watching. Elias raised a hand in greeting, but the man didn't move or blink, his eyes wide and glassy, reflecting the fading light. When Elias stepped closer, the man finally spoke, his voice dry and cracking like brittle wood. "You came by mistake." Before Elias could respond, another voice cut through the silence, sharp and panicked. "Don't say your name." A woman rushed from one of the houses, her face pale, eyes darting toward the forest as if afraid it might hear her. She grabbed Elias's arm with trembling fingers and whispered, "If you value your life, don't say your name out loud here, and don't ask ours." Confused, Elias pulled his arm back, saying he only needed directions, but the old man's head snapped toward him and the woman froze. The forest stirred, leaves rustling without wind, branches creaking and bending slightly toward the village. Elias felt it then, an awareness, something listening, waiting for something specific. "A name," the woman whispered. "It listens for names." They dragged him inside one of the houses before he could ask more. The door slammed shut, locks clicking into place. Candles flickered weakly inside, casting long, shaking shadows over walls covered in symbols, etched, painted, and burned into the wood, all the same shape. A broken circle cut by jagged lines, like something had tried to escape and failed. Elias's heart pounded as he asked where he was. "A village that survived by forgetting," the woman said. She explained in fragments, afraid to speak too clearly. Long ago, something had been found in the forest, not summoned, not created, but discovered, a presence older than language itself. It did not hunt bodies, it hunted identity. Names gave it shape, memory gave it strength, and once it learned who you were, it never forgot. People began to disappear, not violently or suddenly, but quietly. They would wake up forgotten. No one remembered their faces, voices, or existence. Families looked at old photos and felt nothing. Then houses creaked at night. The forest moved closer, and eventually the person would walk into the trees on their own, responding to a voice that knew them better than they knew themselves. That night he slept on the floor, haunted by dreams of voices repeating fragments of his past, memories rearranging themselves, faces blurring. He woke suddenly, gasping, someone whispering beside his ear. Not one voice, but many, repeating a single word again and again, his name. He sat up to find the room empty, candles burning low. But carved freshly into the wooden floor beneath him was the same symbol as the others, and beneath it, his name, perfectly spelled.
From the forest, something stirred, and for the first time in generations, the village knew the silence was about to break.
When I woke, I wasn't sure how much time had passed. The sky above the forest was no longer night, yet not fully day. A gray, lifeless light filtered through the twisted branches, as if the sun itself was afraid to look directly at this place. My body ached, every muscle stiff, but the silence around me was worse. No wind, no birds, no insects, just an oppressive stillness that pressed against my ears until I could hear my own heartbeat echoing inside my skull.
I stood slowly, brushing dirt and dead leaves from my clothes. The trees around me looked different now, taller, older, their bark cracked with deep, unnatural patterns resembling ancient symbols. Some of them seemed carved deliberately, spirals and runes etched into the wood, as if the forest had been marked long ago. As I took a step forward, the ground beneath my feet felt soft, almost breathing, sinking slightly with every movement. I froze, afraid to move further, but the moment I stopped, the forest reacted. A low hum vibrated through the soil, subtle but unmistakable, as if it were urging me onward. I followed a narrow path that hadn't been there before. It wound between the trees like a scar, leading deeper into the forest. The air grew colder with every step, carrying a faint smell of ash and old blood. Somewhere in the distance, I heard chanting, slow, rhythmic, not loud enough to understand, but heavy with intention. It wasn't human. It wasn't even meant for human ears. The path opened into a clearing. At its center stood a massive stone structure, half buried in earth and roots. It looked like an altar, or perhaps a gate. The stones were blackened, fused together as if melted by immense heat long ago. Symbols covered every surface, glowing faintly with a dull crimson light. As I approached, the chanting grew louder, now clearly surrounding me, though no one was visible. The voices spoke in an ancient language, layered over each other, rising and falling like waves. Suddenly, figures emerged from the edges of the clearing. They were humanoid, but wrong. Their bodies were thin, elongated, wrapped in tattered remnants of robes. Their faces were hidden beneath bone-like masks carved with the same symbols as the stones. They moved without sound, gliding rather than walking, forming a wide circle around the altar and around me. I tried to step back, but the ground hardened instantly, locking my feet in place. One of the figures raised its hand. The chanting stopped at once. Silence crashed down so hard it made my head ring. Then the figure spoke, its voice echoing from everywhere and nowhere at once. "You crossed the boundary," it said. "You heard the call. You belong to the turning now." Images flooded my mind without warning. I saw this forest centuries ago, alive with fire and screaming. I saw villages burning, people dragged into the trees by shadows with claws made of smoke. I saw the altar completed, soaked in blood, and something massive pushing its way through from the other side. A god, or what humans once called a god, ancient, furious, starving. The ritual hadn't been meant to summon it, it had been meant to imprison it. The figures began to move again, circling faster. The symbols on the altar flared brighter, heat radiating outward. I felt something inside me respond, a deep, instinctive fear mixed with recognition. The voice returned. "The seal weakens, the world forgets, you remember." The ground trembled violently, cracks splitting the earth around the altar. From within those cracks, darkness spilled like liquid shadow, crawling upward, forming massive shapes that shifted and writhed. I screamed as the presence behind the seal finally made itself known. It didn't have a single form. Horns, wings, eyes, mouths emerged and dissolved endlessly, as if reality couldn't decide how to contain it. Its gaze turned toward me, and in that instant I understood. This was not a monster that destroyed worlds with fire and claws. It destroyed them by existing, by being remembered. The figures dropped to their knees, pressing their foreheads to the ground. "The vessel stands," they chanted. "The door opens." The altar cracked open down the middle, releasing a blinding red light that swallowed the clearing. I felt myself lifted off the ground, my body pulled toward the opening by an invisible force. My thoughts shattered, memories slipping away, replaced by something older, heavier. As I was dragged closer, the forest screamed. The trees bent inward, roots tearing free from the soil, as if the entire land was trying to restrain what was coming. For a brief moment, I saw the world beyond the forest, cities, oceans, skies, fragile and unaware. Then the light consumed everything, and in the darkness that followed, a single thought echoed in my mind, no longer my own. The seal is broken. The age begins again.
I didn't wake up. I returned. Consciousness came back to me in fragments, like shattered glass slowly pulling itself together. I was no longer in the clearing. I was no longer in the forest. I was somewhere deeper, somewhere that didn't belong to the surface world at all. There was no sky above me, only an endless void lit by veins of red light stretching like living arteries across the darkness. The ground beneath my feet felt solid, yet unreal, as if it existed only because I believed it should.
I tried to breathe, and the air tasted ancient, dry, burned, filled with whispers layered beneath one another. Each breath carried voices that were not mine, memories of wars, sacrifices, betrayals. I realized then that I was standing inside the sealed space itself, the prison that had once contained the forgotten God. But it was no longer empty. It was awakening. Ahead of me, colossal shapes moved slowly, like mountains shifting beneath the skin of reality. Every movement sent waves through the void, distorting distance and scale. What seemed far suddenly loomed close, and what appeared massive shrank into insignificance. Time had no meaning here. Seconds stretched into eternities, and eternities collapsed into moments. The present spoke without words. Its thoughts pressed directly into my mind, heavy and crushing. I saw its memories, not as stories, but as sensations. I felt the birth of stars, the collapse of worlds, the moment humanity first looked into the dark and named it divine. This being had been worshipped, feared, sacrificed to. And when humanity learned to forget, it had been sealed away, erased from history, buried beneath layers of myth and denial. You are the fracture, the presence conveyed, the memory that slipped through. I tried to resist, but resistance had no meaning here. My body began to change, not visibly, but fundamentally. My thoughts no longer moved in straight lines. I could perceive multiple moments at once. The forest burning, the altar breaking, the figures kneeling, and far beyond that, cities trembling as unseen cracks formed beneath their foundations. The seal hadn't just weakened, it had transferred. I understood the truth too late. The prison had never been meant to last forever. It had been designed to move, to pass the burden forward, to bind the God not to stone, but to awareness itself, to a mind capable of remembering it. The void began to collapse inward. The red veins of light pulsed violently, rupturing, spilling darkness that devoured itself. I felt myself falling, not downward, but outward, back toward toward the world. As I fell, pieces of the presence clung to me, embedding themselves into my thoughts, my instincts, my perception of reality. I screamed, but the sound fractured into countless echoes, each one becoming a whisper that would haunt the world above. I struck the ground hard. Dirt, grass, rain. I was back in the forest, kneeling at the edge of the shattered altar. The robed figures were gone. The symbols had burned themselves into the earth, leaving scorched scars that still glowed faintly. The sky above was wrong. Clouds spiraled unnaturally, rotating around a dark center like a wound in the heavens. I staggered to my feet. The forest was dying. Trees crumbled into ash at the edges, while others twisted grotesquely, growing too fast, splitting and bleeding dark sap. Animals fled in blind panic, crashing through the undergrowth. The ground shook in distant pulses, each one stronger than the last. Then I felt it. People, far away, thousands of them, millions. Their fear brushed against my mind like static. Nightmares were spreading. Cultures across the world were remembering things they had never known. Ancient symbols resurfaced in dreams, on walls, in blood. The forgotten God was no longer bound to one place. It was leaking into thought, into belief, into terror. I clutched my head as voices screamed through me, not demanding worship, not demanding obedience, but recognition. To be remembered was to exist. To exist was to reshape reality. And through me, it was being remembered again. The ground split open behind me. From the depths rose a shadow vast enough to blot out the sky, its form unstable, constantly rewriting itself. It did not fully emerge. It didn't need to. The world itself was becoming its vessel now. As the sky darkened and the first unnatural lightning tore through the clouds, one final realization settled into my shattered mind. This was no longer about stopping it. This was about surviving what came next. The moment the final seal broke, the world screamed, not in sound, but in sensation. Reality itself seemed to recoil as the ancient force beneath the ground finally awakened fully. The sky above the ruins darkened instantly, clouds spiraling inward like a colossal wound opening in the heavens. Lightning cracked downward in jagged, unnatural patterns, striking the earth again and again, as if trying to pin it in place. The ground beneath my feet convulsed violently, splitting open in massive fractures that glowed with a molten, otherworldly light. From those depths came a roar, deep, layered, ancient, echoing with the voices of countless beings long erased from history. The entity rose, not as a single shape, but as a convergence of myth and nightmare. Stone, shadow, fire, and bone fused into a towering form that defied scale. Its body was etched with symbols older than language, each one burning with power, each one screaming a forgotten name. Eyes like collapsing stars opened within its mass, turning slowly, seeing not just the present, but every moment that had ever led here. I felt its gaze pass through me, stripping away fear, memory, identity, judging not who I was, but what I represented. Humanity, intrusion, arrogance. The earth answered its awakening. Mountains in the distance cracked and folded inward. Oceans far beyond the horizon rose into towering walls of water, pulled toward the epicenter of the ritual. Cities trembled as ancient ley lines reactivated beneath them, tearing through foundations, swallowing streets whole. The sky bled fire as meteoric fragments fell like divine punishment. This was not destruction born of chaos, it was correction, a reset written into the bones of the world itself.
The cultists, those who had believed they would rule beside the entity, were the first to be erased. They didn't die, they unraveled. Their bodies broke into ash and light, their screams cut short as the entity absorbed them without acknowledgement. Power without obedience had never been promised, only annihilation. I understood then, this being was not evil, it was inevitable. A god formed before morality existed, before life had a voice. The ground gave way completely, and I fell, tumbling through collapsing layers of stone and memory. Visions assaulted me as I descended, civilizations rising, worshipping the entity, then being wiped away when they overstepped, again and again, a cycle spanning millions of years. We were not the first, we would not be the last. Humanity had simply reached the same conclusion every arrogant species reached, that we were untouchable. The entity existed to remind the universe otherwise.
I hit solid ground hard, coughing as ash filled my lungs. Around me, survivors crawled from rubble, their faces hollow with disbelief. Above us, the entity raised its massive form higher, anchoring itself between earth and sky. The symbols across its body ignited simultaneously, and a shockwave tore outward at unimaginable speed. Forests disintegrated, mountains collapsed into dust, the ocean surged forward, rewriting coastlines in seconds. The world map ceased to exist. As the shockwave passed over me, something changed. Time slowed, the noise faded, and in that silence, the entity spoke, not with sound, but with absolute certainty. It showed me the future, a scorched world, reshaped, quieter. No cities, no machines, just scattered survivors clinging to myth and fear, whispering warnings into the dark. Legends born from catastrophe, stories meant to prevent this from ever happening again, stories that would, inevitably, be ignored. Then it withdrew, slowly, deliberately, its purpose fulfilled. The sky began to tear itself apart as the energy holding it here collapsed inward. With one final blinding surge of light, the entity vanished back into the abyss beneath the world. The ground sealed shut behind it, leaving only a vast, smoldering scar stretching farther than the eye could see. Silence followed, a broken, terrified silence. The sun rose hours later over a ruined horizon, casting light on a world forever changed. I stirred among the remnants, knowing with absolute certainty that this was not the end of horror, but its beginning. Because now humanity knew the truth. Gods were real, myths were warnings, and the earth itself was alive and watching. And one day, when we forget again, it will awaken once more.